All right, guys, I missed a week. It's been hellishly busy for me, but I'm not giving up. I am continuing with the lessons, and today is our fourth lesson, and we are going to be talking about world creation. And I want to talk about world creation specifically because it is such a um, all encompassing thing. When we as authors start creating worlds, we get lost. For a great example, I want you to look at the world of um, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. Tolkien put so much work into that world. There are whole languages, there are systems of magic, there are different races, there are races that never show up in the books. Um, it's just insane, the depth. And it can be very difficult to get yourself to a point where you have enough of a world created, but you're not being overwhelmed by the amount of creation you have done. So, no matter what you are doing, if you're writing fiction, you're going to be creating a world. Now, that world may be relatively close to the real world. Um, as an example, I'm writing a book that is based on my grandmother's life. It's a historical fiction, but only because I didn't want to put a whole lot of. I have most of the real life stuff, but some of it, honestly, y'all wouldn't believe. I found out so much about grandma. Oh my gosh. Anyway, obviously, the world that I'm dealing with there is almost exactly like the real world because that's where it takes place. Um, I have to go back in time a bit, and in doing that, I went and I studied some videos from 1940s Scotland, in particular Aberdeen, and I went and did some reading on it. But largely, it's the world that we have today, and the physical parts of that have not changed. So I have a basis for that world. But then if you flip from that to let's talk about the world of my Taylor Mage series. It's a vampire novel series. It's based in today's world, but now we have magic and we have magical creatures. And I have to explain to my readers why they don't know about the werewolf living in the woods up north and why they don't know that their neighbors are vampires and things like that. And so I have to put thought into that and how it all works. Um, in my vampire novels, I only created a little bit more of the world than I actually needed, so that I could fill in holes fairly quickly. But I had to explain the magic and the blood sucking and things like that. And one of the things that I needed to figure out for myself was how much blood a single vampire needed in order to survive. And why did I need to know that? Well, because I needed to know how many vampires I could have living in the underworld of Vancouver. Because my vampires don't kill people, therefore I have to know how much blood they can take without killing someone, and yada yada. So I did a lot of math, but it was worth it. Not because it ever shows up in the book, because it doesn't. Um, but because I needed something that I could lean back on if anybody ever questioned it. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And then when you're dealing with something that's science fiction and you're dealing with a whole new world, something that maybe has different gravity, different laws of physics, different science. I mean, that all is really complex, and you have to understand enough of it yourself that when your readers read it, they know that it's real. Take Star Trek, for example. One of the things that made Star Trek so amazing is the fact that, Scotty could run on screen and say, Captain, she cannot take much more of this. And They talked about Jeffrey's tubes, and they talked about this and that and the other thing. And it was all spoken about in the same way that you and I talk about light switches and gas stoves and televisions. Everybody knows it, so there's no reason to explain it. We have a term for that now. It's called technobabble. And what it does is it puts a layer of reality on top of your science fiction so that the people who are reading it know. They know that you understand the world, that the science is real, etc. And when you're talking science fiction, you also have to add in a layer of how real do you want it to be. So we have sci-fi fantasy, which is science does crazy things and we just don't stress ourselves over how it works. But pure science fiction, Dune, for example, some of Heinlein's stuff, Arthur C. Clarke, those types of science fiction are based hard on science. And so the science fiction novel that I'm working on with one of my partners is very heavily based in reality. And so the spaceships are based on knowledge that we have today, but popped a few years into the future so that it's after Musk has gone to Mars. We all know that it can be done. And so I've taken technology 2 or 3 steps into the future, but not 1,000 steps. Why are all these things important? Well, because if then when you're writing with an authority, and that authority comes through in your writing. The reason that we believe Heinlein when he writes about, Michael Valentine from the stars, from Mars, is because he wrote it with conviction, personal conviction. And that's how you have to write. You have to understand your world at a level that is above what your readers will understand by the finish of your novel, because you have to know all those bits and pieces in order to know that it will work and come together. You can make maps, you can create races, you can create languages, you can create whole cultures, different whatever you want. If you want to have talking dogs and birds that do chores around the house like Disney, go for it. But you have to understand how it works and why it works. And so all of that can be done on sticky notes and has been for years. But I actually highly recommend using, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, World Anvil and Readsy both have the ability to track this stuff. World Anvil is great for world creation. It's not for writing per se, although you can use it that way. But that's where you can make your notes and your maps. It has map builders and name generators and a zillion things like that, which are useful when you're writing. But it's not as useful as a writing application. It's good to run in tandem. Readsy is your writing program, and you might instead be using one of the zillion other programs out there. Go for it, whether you're using LibreOffice or Google Docs or Word or whatever. Does not matter. Find yourself a word processor, use that, and write. I want to give the biggest thing that I want to give you finishing up here is it can be very luring to be world creating. It's exciting, and it doesn't have to be perfectly written because the only person who's ever really going to see it is you. But don't get so caught up in it that you forget the writing, okay? You need to do writing every day. I make my world building time actually separate from my writing. So when I write fiction, I generally write a fiction novel in November during National Novel Writing Month. I take all of October and usually part of September, and that's my world building time. I create my characters, I do character drawings, I make maps, I plan out some of the major plot points, all that stuff, all the minutia. I take the time and I do it right. And I'm not worried about my writing because it's not writing time yet. The only thing I will sometimes do is take notes on, what I might want to have happen in this. So there you have it. World building. It is a vital and important part of your writing process, but don't let it overwhelm your writing process. I recommend either setting aside time specifically for world building prior to writing your story, or severely limiting your world building time each day. Um, if you want to spend 15 minutes on world building before you write each day, or even after you write each day, that's fine. But make sure your writing is the important part when it's time to write, because otherwise you're going to get pulled into that wonderful um, uh, endorphin rush of new creation and lose track of the actual work. So don't do that. Your homework this week is to go out and spend no more than 30 minutes making notes about the world your characters are living in. So I hope you go out and do and have fun. All right, guys, have yourself a great week, and I will see you in a couple of weeks, hopefully. Knock on wood.